Black doctor saw her ultrasound while she was in labor. He calls the cold CEO, "Your wife needs you now." The richest man in Georgia stood powerless in a hospital corridor, blocked by a family that saw him as the enemy, not the father. What would you do if the person you abandoned needed you most? If walking away from the boardroom meant admitting that money, power, and control mean nothing when someone you love is fighting for her life? Hi viewers, kindly tell us where you're watching from and what time it is. Warm welcome to the family. Enjoy the story. He built a billion-dollar empire on one rule: never let emotions cloud judgment. But the phone call at 2:47 a.m. would prove that some battles can't be won with money. Richard Hale sat at the head of his mahogany conference table, 40 floors above Atlanta's glittering skyline. Diamond cufflinks caught the light as he gestured toward quarterly projections that would make grown men weep with envy. His voice commanded respect from every suit in that room, until his phone buzzed with destiny disguised as a doctor's voice. "Mr. Hale, this is Dr. Marcus Green at Atlanta General. Your wife needs you now." The boardroom fell silent. Richard's jaw tightened. "I don't have a wife, doctor. Monica Johnson is in critical condition. She's having your baby and complications." The phone clattered against Italian marble. Every face around that table watched Atlanta's most ruthless CEO crumble at words no amount of stock options could prepare him for. Have you ever gotten a call that changed everything? One moment when your carefully controlled world crashed around a voice you weren't expecting? That's exactly what happened to Richard, except the woman fighting for her life 3 miles away wasn't supposed to matter anymore. 6 months ago, Monica Johnson was a secret. A beautiful black nurse from Georgia's roughest neighborhoods who somehow saw past his billions to the broken man underneath. Their affair burned through Atlanta's summer heat like wildfire. Passionate, reckless, and doomed from the start. She was everything his world would never accept. He was everything hers had learned to distrust. The problem? Richard walked away the moment she needed him most. The night Monica whispered she might be pregnant, he disappeared faster than smoke. Blocked her calls, changed his number, built walls so high that even love couldn't climb them. But here's what really gets your heart racing. Dr. Green wasn't calling about any ordinary birth. The ultrasound had revealed something that stopped the medical team cold. A genetic marker so rare it existed in less than 0.02% of the population. The same marker sitting in Richard's private medical files. Science doesn't lie. DNA doesn't care about your feelings. And Monica Johnson was about to give birth to living proof that some mistakes follow you no matter how fast you run. "Sir," his assistant's voice trembled. "Should I reschedule the Tokyo call?" Richard stared at his reflection in the conference table's polished surface. The man looking back had conquered Fortune 500 companies, destroyed competitors without blinking, and never, not once, let his heart make decisions for his head. What would you do if the person you abandoned needed you most? If walking away from the boardroom meant admitting that money, power, and control mean nothing when someone you love is fighting for her life? Richard's Bentley tore through Atlanta traffic like a silver bullet aimed at redemption. But as those hospital lights grew brighter, one question burned through his mind harder than any business deal he'd ever closed. Was the baby his, or had Monica moved on faster than he thought? The empire's most powerful man was about to discover that some battles can't be won. They can only be survived. The richest man in Georgia stood powerless in a hospital corridor, blocked by a family that saw him as the enemy, not the father. Atlanta General's automatic doors whooshed open like gates to judgment. Richard's Italian leather shoes clicked against linoleum that had seen more tears than his corporate offices ever would. The hospital smelled of antiseptic and anxiety, 2 things his money couldn't wash away. "Excuse me, sir. Visiting hours. I'm here for Monica Johnson." Richard's voice carried the authority that moved mountains and stock prices. Room 314. The elevator ride felt longer than quarterly earnings calls. Each floor that passed brought him closer to a reckoning 6 months in the making. When those doors opened, he expected medical chaos, worried nurses, maybe Dr. Green himself. Instead, He walked into a wall of hostile black faces that made his billion-dollar confidence evaporate like morning fog. Well, look what crawled out of his mansion. Monica's sister Keisha rose from a plastic chair like a warrior queen. Her scrubs were wrinkled from hours of worry, but her eyes burned with protective fury that could melt steel. Richard straightened his tie, a nervous habit that betrayed more than he'd ever admit. "I'm here to see Monica." The doctor called. The doctor called? Monica's mother, Mrs. Johnson, laughed without humor. Her church dress was faded but pressed, dignity worn like armor against men like him. "Now you show up? After 6 months of nothing. Have you ever had to face the family of someone you hurt? When every eye in that room holds your sins up like evidence." That's exactly where Richard stood, surrounded by people who knew exactly what kind of man he really was. The waiting room became a courtroom. Other families pretended not to stare while this drama played out in whispers loud enough to cut glass. Richard's designer suit suddenly felt like costume jewelry, expensive but fake. Where were you when she cried herself to sleep every night? Keisha stepped closer, unimpressed by his height or his wealth. When she worked double shifts just to afford prenatal vitamins. "You don't understand." "Oh, I understand perfectly." Mrs. Johnson's voice carried the weight of generations who'd watched powerful men make promises they never kept. Rich white man gets his fun, then disappears when reality comes calling. We've seen this movie before. Richard's hands clenched into fists. Not from anger, from shame that burned hotter than any boardroom humiliation. Because they were right. Every accusation hit like bullets designed to find his heart. Do you know someone who's faced this kind of judgment? When your past mistakes stand trial in a public place, and every word feels like a verdict you can't appeal. Through the ICU doors came sounds that made his chest tighten, medical equipment beeping, voices calling orders, and underneath it all, a woman's cries that he recognized even after 6 months of trying to forget. Dr. Green emerged from delivery room 314, his expression grave as a funeral director's. "Mr. Hale, there's something about the baby you need to know, something that changes everything." The hallway fell silent, except for machines keeping someone alive. Some secrets are buried so deep, even ultrasounds can't hide them forever. Dr. Marcus Green looked like a man who delivered 1,000 babies and saved twice as many lives. His dark skin showed lines earned through medical school scholarships and residencies that demanded everything. When he spoke, even Richard's arrogance paid attention. "Follow me." The consultation room smelled like leather chairs and life-changing conversations. Dr. Green set his tablet on the glass table between them, the screen glowing with images that looked like abstract art to untrained eyes. "Your baby has a condition called heterochromia iridum. Different colored eyes." Dr. Green's finger traced the ultrasound. "But here's what makes this interesting. It's linked to a genetic sequence found in less than 0.02% of the population." Richard leaned forward despite himself. "What does that mean?" "It means science just proved what everyone in that waiting room refuses to believe." Dr. Green pulled up another screen, medical records with Richard's name across the top. "You both carry the same rare genetic marker. This child is unquestionably yours." The room felt smaller suddenly. Richard's breathing changed, became shallow like a man, drowning in responsibility he'd spent 6 months avoiding. Have you ever had science prove something you desperately wanted to deny? When DNA strips away every excuse and forces you to face truth that terrifies you more than any corporate takeover. But that's not why I called you. Dr. Green's voice dropped lower. Monica's developed severe preeclampsia. Her blood pressure is climbing toward stroke levels. The baby's heart rate keeps dropping. Through the walls came sounds Richard had heard in war movies. Urgent voices, equipment alarms, the controlled chaos of people fighting death itself. Somewhere in that medical storm, Monica was battling for 2 lives. "We need to perform an emergency C-section. Now." Dr. Green stood, his white coat flowing like a judge's robes. "But she keeps asking for you. Even unconscious, she calls her name." Richard's billion-dollar confidence cracked like ice under pressure. She what? Despite everything you put her through, you're the one she wants fighting beside her. The doctor's eyes held judgment and something else, maybe respect for a love that survived abandonment. The question is, are you the man who runs from hard moments, or the father this child deserves? What would you do if someone loved you enough to call your name while fighting for her life? If forgiveness came wrapped in medical crisis and genetic proof you couldn't escape? Richard's phone buzzed, his assistant, probably wondering why Atlanta's most powerful CEO had vanished mid-meeting. Stock prices, profit margins, board expectations, none of it mattered now. Where is she? Dr. Green moved toward the door. Room 314. But Mr. Hale, what you see in there might change you forever. Monica is not just fighting for her life. She's fighting for both of your lives in ways you can't imagine yet. As they walked toward destiny disguised as a delivery room, Richard realized something that stopped his heart. He was about to become a father to a child he'd spent 6 months pretending didn't exist. He'd never prayed before, but watching the woman he abandoned fight for her life taught him the language of desperation. Room 314 looked like a space station designed to keep souls from floating away. Machines surrounded Monica's bed like electronic prayers, each beep and flash a plea to whatever gods controlled the thin line between life and death. For tubes snaked across her dark skin like silver rivers, and her beautiful face was swollen with the strain of keeping two hearts beating. Richard had seen hostile takeovers, board coups, and million-dollar deals collapse in real time. None of it prepared him for the woman who'd haunted his dreams, looking so fragile that breathing seemed like an act of courage. Monica! His voice cracked like a teenager's. Her eyes fluttered open, those same brown eyes that had seen through his wealth to the scared boy underneath. For a moment, recognition flickered across her features. Then her face twisted with pain as another contraction hit. Sir, you need to scrub in if you're staying. The nurse handed him surgical clothing without judgment. In delivery rooms, apparently, money meant nothing and love meant everything. Have you ever watched someone you love fight a battle you couldn't help them win? When all your power, all your resources, mean absolutely nothing compared to one person's will to survive. Richard's hands shook as he tied the surgical mask. Through the observation window, Monica's family watched him like he was on trial for crimes against their daughter's heart. Mrs. Johnson pressed her palm against the glass, lips moving in prayers that had more power than any stock portfolio. Blood pressure spiking again, called the nurse. 180 over 110. Dr. Green moved with the precision of a man who'd fought this battle before. We need to get this baby out now. Monica, can you hear me? Her hand found Richard's without her eyes opening. The touch sent electricity through him. Not passion this time, but recognition. Even fighting for her life, she knew he'd come. Don't you dare leave me, Richard whispered against her palm. Not when I finally understand what I lost. The monitor above her bed screamed warnings that made everyone move faster. Numbers that meant nothing to Richard, but everything to the medical team trying to save the woman whose name he'd spent 6 months trying to forget. She's seizing, Dr. Green announced with controlled urgency. Prep for emergency C-section. Now, the room exploded into choreographed chaos. Richard found himself pushed against the wall, watching helplessly as the woman he'd abandoned fought the kind of battle that money couldn't win and power couldn't influence. When did you realize you loved someone? Was it when success meant nothing compared to their next breath? When her biggest fear wasn't losing wealth, but losing the person who made wealth meaningless. Monica's body convulsed against restraints designed to keep her safe. The baby's heart monitor dropped to numbers that made Dr. Green's face go stone-cold serious. Richard had seen that expression in boardrooms right before companies died. Talk to her, Dr. Green ordered without looking up from his preparations. She needs to hear your voice. I'm here, baby. I'm right here. The words came from some place Richard didn't know existed, deeper than his business voice, more real than any boardroom performance. You fight. You hear me? Fight for us. Monica's eyes fluttered open for just a moment, long enough to focus on his face with clarity that cut through pain and medication. Her lips moved, forming words that only he could hear above the medical chaos. "He's not yours." The words hit Richard like bullets designed to shatter everything he thought he knew. As Monica's eyes closed again and the machine screamed louder warnings, one question burned through his mind. If the baby wasn't his, then why was he here? The genetic marker didn't lie. But neither did the man who stepped from the shadows, claiming the child as his own. The hospital chapel at 3 a.m. felt like a place where secrets went to confess themselves. Richard sat in the back pew, still wearing scrubs stained with the kind of fear that doesn't wash out. Monica's words echoed through his mind like a song he couldn't stop hearing. "He's not yours." But science didn't lie. Dr. Green's genetic evidence sat in his phone like digital DNA proof. The rare marker, the medical impossibility, the statistical certainty that this child carried his bloodline. So why would Monica, fighting for her life, use her last conscious words to deny what ultrasounds had confirmed? Footsteps echoed against marble floors. Richard looked up to see a man approaching. Tall, confident, wearing the kind of understated, expensive clothes that whispered rather than shouted wealth. His skin was the same warm brown as Monica's, and his eyes held the kind of steady strength that Richard recognized from mirrors 20 years ago. "You must be Richard Hale." The voice carried no hostility, just the quiet certainty of a man comfortable in his own skin. Richard stood, his businessman's instincts measuring this potential threat, who moved through sacred space like he belonged there. "And you are?" "Marcus Thompson. I've been Monica's friend for the past 4 months." The words hit like ice water in Richard's veins. For months. Right around the time he'd blocked Monica's number and disappeared from her life like a ghost afraid of haunting. Have you ever met someone who represented everything you should have been? When your replacement stands before you wearing the patience and consistency you never managed to give. Marcus settled into the pew beside Richard, not as an enemy, but as a man sharing the same vigil. "She called me tonight, around 11 p.m., when the contractions started getting serious. Asked me to drive her to the hospital." Richard's hands clenched. "You drove her?" "I've driven her to every doctor's appointment for the past 3 months." Marcus's voice held no judgment, just facts delivered with devastating gentleness. Held her hand during ultrasounds. Helped pick out baby names. Built the crib that's sitting in her apartment right now. The chapel felt smaller suddenly, like confession booths designed for sins too large to contain. Richard stared at the stained glass windows catching early morning light, each colored panel telling stories of redemption that felt impossible to reach. "The genetic marker," Richard said finally. Dr. Green confirmed. "Genetics are complicated." Marcus pulled out his phone, scrolled to a photo that made Richard's chest tighten. Monica laughing, her pregnant belly round and beautiful, Marcus's hand resting protectively over where their child grew. Love isn't. Can you love someone else's child as your own? When biology says one thing, but your heart claims something completely different. "You had your chance," Marcus continued, his voice steady as Sunday morning prayers. 6 months to be the man she needed. I stayed for the morning sickness, the midnight cravings, the fears about delivery. Where were you? Building walls, running from responsibility, choosing money over the woman whose laugh had become his favorite sound. Richard knew exactly where he'd been, and the truth tasted like regret mixed with expensive whiskey. "She loves you," Marcus said, words that should have brought victory but felt like defeat. "Even after everything, she called your name tonight." But love isn't enough when someone needs reliability. Through the chapel doors came the sound of squeaking wheels. A hospital bed being moved quickly through corridors. Both men stood, recognizing the urgency that meant life was making decisions faster than hearts could follow. As they rushed toward the delivery wing, Richard realized that some battles weren't about winning or losing. Sometimes they were about discovering which man deserved to be called father and which one had the courage to step aside. The choice waiting in room 314 would define 3 lives forever. She could only save one relationship. The question was whether she'd choose the man who left or the man who stayed. Recovery Room 315 felt like a confessional booth where hearts laid bare their sins and prayers with equal weight. Monica lay propped against white pillows, her newborn son sleeping peacefully in the clear hospital bassinet beside her bed. The baby's tiny fingers curled around. On the charge of conspiracy to defraud charitable organizations, we find the defendant not guilty. The prosecutor's table looked like they'd swallowed poison. Torres shuffled his papers with hands that shook slightly, his career-making case crumbling into dust. The jury had believed Alana's testimony about Patricia Manning's embezzlement scheme. They believed the evidence Richard's investigators had uncovered showing the missing money in offshore accounts controlled by his former assistant. Most importantly, they believed in the love between a billionaire and a woman who'd risked everything to stand by him. "Mr. Cole," the judge said after the jury was dismissed, "you're free to go." Case dismissed. The media circus outside the courthouse was exactly what Richard had expected. Cameras flashed like lightning as he emerged with Alana beside him, Marcus bundled against her chest. Reporters shouted questions over each other, their voices creating a wall of noise and chaos. "Mr. Cole, how does it feel to be vindicated? Will you be suing the prosecutor's office? What's next for you and Ms. Williams?" Richard stopped on the courthouse steps, his arm around Alana's waist, and faced the cameras with the same confidence he'd once used in boardrooms. 3 months ago, I thought I knew what success looked like. I thought it was about money and power and impressing people who didn't matter. His voice carried clearly over the chaos. I was wrong. Success is standing beside someone who believes in your innocence when the whole world thinks you're guilty. Success is loving someone so much that losing everything else doesn't scare you. What victory in your life felt most earned? Share your triumph story, because what Richard said next would change how the world saw their love. Alana Williams didn't just save my reputation. She saved my soul. She showed me what real strength looks like, what real grace means, what real love can do when it's built on truth instead of convenience. He turned to look at her, this woman who'd walked into his world and changed everything. Which is why I'm not asking her to marry me here in front of all these cameras. That moment belongs to us, not to you. The crowd laughed, some of them wiping their eyes. Even the hardest reporters seemed moved by the raw honesty in his voice. But I will say this. 3 months ago, a pregnant woman accepted my cruel challenge to prove her worth on a dance floor. Today, I'm the one grateful to be worthy of dancing with her for the rest of my life. As they walked down the courthouse steps together, the setting sun painting Palm Beach in shades of gold, Alana felt the weight of the past year lifting from her shoulders. They'd survived scandal, corruption, federal prosecution, and the judgment of a world that wanted to see them fail. As they watched Marcus take his first wobbly steps on the beach that evening, Richard dropped to one knee, but his proposal wasn't what anyone expected. 3 years after she scrubbed floors at his charity ball, she returned to that same ballroom, this time as his equal partner in every way that mattered. The Cole Resort ballroom sparkled with the same crystal chandeliers, the same polished marble floors, the same view of the Atlantic Ocean stretching toward forever. But everything else had changed. Where once Florida's elite had sipped champagne and written checks for tax deductions, tonight the room was filled with families from Atlanta, Jacksonville, and Miami. Construction workers in their Sunday best. Single mothers who'd saved for months to buy new dresses. Children who'd never seen luxury like this running between tables with wide-eyed wonder. Alana stood at the edge of the dance floor in her wedding dress. Simple white silk that flowed around her like water, chosen not for its designer label, but for how it made her feel. Beautiful, worthy, complete. 3 years ago, I asked you to dance, Richard said, appearing beside her in a tuxedo that somehow looked less intimidating than it had that terrible night. Tonight, I'm asking you to dance with me for the rest of our lives. The orchestra began the same waltz that had started everything, the same melody that had turned humiliation into something beautiful, mockery into love, 2 separate worlds into one shared future. Are you sure you're ready for that? Alana smiled up at him, her hand finding his with the ease of long practice. Dancing with me for 50 years might get boring. Never. Richard pulled her onto the floor where they'd first touched, first felt the spark that would reshape both their lives. I plan to fall in love with you over and over again, every single day. They moved together like they'd been dancing forever, her white dress swirling around them while their friends and family watched with tears in their eyes. Marcus, now a sturdy 3-year-old, clapped from his seat at the head table, his gap-toothed grin lighting up the room. You taught me that nobility isn't about bloodlines or bank accounts, Richard whispered against her ear as they spun through a turn that had once seemed impossible. It's about how you treat people when you have all the power. The community center they'd built together stood across town, serving families just like Alana's had been. The Alana Williams Center for Economic Opportunity, her name in brass letters because Richard had insisted she was the real force behind their success. 300 families had found jobs through their programs. 500 children had received scholarships. 1,000 dreams had been given the chance to grow. Do you ever regret it? She asked as the music swelled around them. Giving up the simple life for all this chaos. Simple, Richard laughed, spinning her out and pulling her back against his chest. Loving you has been many things, but simple isn't one of them. Extraordinary, yes. Life-changing, absolutely. Worth every moment of chaos, without question. If someone challenged your worth today, would you dance? Would you prove them wrong? Tell me what makes you worthy of love and respect. As the waltz ended, the room erupted in applause, but neither of them heard it. They were lost in each other's eyes, remembering the journey that had brought them here. From employer and employee to partners in every sense. From two people from different worlds to one family building something beautiful together. I love you, Mrs. Cole, Richard whispered against her lips. I love you too, she whispered back. Now and always. If this story moved you, hit that like button and subscribe for more tales of love conquering impossible odds. Comment below. Would you have taken that dance? Would you have stayed when the world turned against you? And remember, sometimes the person who challenges you most becomes the one who changes you most. Your story matters too. Share in the comments. Monica sat in the rocking chair beside his bed, holding legal documents that would determine their future. Richard stood by the window, phone calls about custody battles forgotten for the first time in weeks. And Marcus, steady, reliable Marcus, sat in the corner chair he'd claimed during every hospital visit, even after learning he wasn't David's biological father. I want to withdraw from the custody case, Monica announced to the room, her words carrying the weight of a decision that had cost her sleepless nights and constant prayer. Both men looked at her like she'd spoken in foreign languages. What do you mean? Richard moved away from the window, his business instincts recognizing the tone that meant everything was about to change. I mean, fighting over David like he's property is the worst thing we could do to him. Monica's voice held the strength that came from mothers who'd learned the difference between protecting and controlling. He needs all of us, not two of us taking turns and one of us feeling left out. Marcus leaned forward in his chair. Monica, after everything that's happened, we're still 3 people who love one child more than we love being right. Her eyes moved between the men who represented 2 different kinds of love in her life. David doesn't care about blood tests or legal papers. He cares about feeling safe and wanted. Have you ever watched someone choose healing over winning? When love becomes more important than being right, and family gets redefined by choice rather than biology. Richard pulled a chair close to Monica's, close enough to see the tiny birthmark on David's forehead that looked exactly like the one he'd inherited from his own father. What are you suggesting? Co-parenting. All 3 of us. Monica's idea sounded crazy until she explained it with the logic of someone who'd spent weeks thinking about nothing else. You provide financial stability and business connections. Marcus provides daily consistency and emotional support. I provide everything mothers give that nobody else can. The hospital room fell quiet except for baby sounds and the distant noise of other families learning to navigate love in complicated circumstances. You want us to share custody? Marcus asked, his voice careful with hope he was afraid to trust. I want us to share responsibility. Monica shifted David to her shoulder, patting his back with movements that had become natural as breathing. Not weekends and holidays divided by court orders. Actual partnership where we make decisions together. Richard's businessman brain processed the logistics while his heart dealt with emotions he'd never learned to organize. How would that work practically? Marcus keeps the apartment lease he co-signed last month. You help with daycare and medical costs. We all attend pediatrician appointments and school conferences. David grows up knowing he has 3 adults who put his needs before their egos. When was the last time someone offered you something you didn't know you wanted? When the solution to your problem came wrapped in trust you weren't sure you deserved. Marcus stood up, pacing to the window where Richard had been standing. And what happens when one of us meets someone else? When relationships change and David gets caught in the middle. Then we figure it out like adults who love him more than we love drama. Monica's answer came with the confidence of someone who'd already considered every possible complication. The same way divorced parents do it, except we're choosing cooperation before lawyers force it on us. Richard reached over to touch David's tiny hand, watching his son's fingers automatically curl around his thumb with complete trust. The grip was stronger than any business contract he'd ever signed. I've never shared anything important in my life, Richard admitted, his vulnerability still feeling like speaking a foreign language. I don't know how to do partnership when it comes to something that matters this much. Then you learn, Monica said simply. The same way David's going to learn everything, one day at a time, with people who love you enough to be patient while you figure it out. As David stirred in Monica's arms, opening eyes that were definitely Richard's, but holding trust that Marcus had earned through midnight feedings and diaper changes, 3 adults realized they were about to attempt something harder than any custody battle. Building a family based on choice rather than obligation. The healing was just beginning. The past never stays buried. It resurfaces at the worst possible moment, hungry for the happiness you've finally found. 6 months into their unconventional co-parenting arrangement, life had found a rhythm none of them expected to work. Richard's penthouse had been transformed into something that looked like an actual home. Baby toys scattered across Italian marble floors, formula bottles next to crystal whiskey decanters, and a nursery that cost more than most people's cars, but felt warm because it was filled with love from 3 adults who'd learned to put David's needs before their pride. Monica was feeding David his evening bottle when the elevator doors opened without warning. The woman who stepped out moved like she owned every room she entered. Blonde hair perfectly styled, designer dress that whispered expensive rather than shouted it, and the kind of cold confidence that came from never hearing the word no. Hello, darling. Victoria Sinclair's voice could freeze champagne at room temperature. Surprised to see me? Richard dropped his coffee mug, watching it shatter against marble like his carefully constructed new life. Victoria, what the hell are you doing here? Is that any way to greet your wife? The words hit the room like grenades designed to destroy whatever peace they'd managed to build. Monica's hand tightened on David's bottle. Marcus, who'd been reading financial reports on the couch, stood up slowly like someone preparing for battle. Ex-wife, Richard corrected, but his voice carried uncertainty that made everyone notice. We divorced 2 years ago. Victoria's laugh sounded like breaking glass mixed with expensive perfume. Actually, darling, we didn't. Your lawyers filed preliminary paperwork, but I never signed the final documents. Legally speaking, I'm still Mrs. Richard Hale. Have you ever had someone from your past show up to destroy your present? When happiness becomes a target for people who can't stand seeing you move on without them. Monica stood up, holding David closer to her chest like a shield against whatever storm was about to hit their family. What do you want, Victoria? Well, I've always wanted my husband back. Victoria moved through the penthouse like she was conducting an inventory of everything that had changed since she'd been gone. Although I see you've been busy playing house with the help. The racial insult hung in the air like poison designed to kill whatever peace they'd found. Marcus stepped forward, his protective instincts overriding the patience that usually defined him. You need to leave, he said quietly, the kind of calm that preceded storms. I don't think so. Victoria pulled out her phone, scrolling to photos that made Richard's face go white as hospital sheets. I have some interesting pictures here. Richard entering this building at all hours. Monica Johnson, that's your real name, isn't it, dear? Bringing a baby to his penthouse. Quite the scandal for Atlanta's most respected CEO. The photos told a story designed to destroy reputations and tear apart the family they'd worked so hard to build. Richard with David in the hospital. Monica laughing at something Marcus had said during a pediatrician visit. All three of them at the park, looking like exactly what they were, people who'd learned to love unconventionally. Do you know what it feels like when someone weaponizes your happiness? When the life you've built becomes ammunition for people who want to watch it burn. What do you want? Richard asked, his business voice returning as he recognized extortion disguised as a social visit. $50 million. And you never see either of them again. Victoria's proposal came with the casual cruelty of someone ordering lunch. I know about your little custody arrangement. How do you think that would look in the society pages? Billionaire CEO shares baby with black nurse and her boyfriend. Monica felt David stirring against her chest, responding to the tension that filled the room like smoke from a fire that threatened to consume everything they'd built. 6 months of healing, of learning to trust, of believing that love could overcome the obstacles society placed in their path. The choice is yours, darling, Victoria continued, her voice sweet as poisoned honey. Your reputation and your fortune, or your little unconventional family. You can't have both. Richard looked at Monica holding their son, at Marcus standing ready to defend them both, at the life they'd built from broken pieces and held together with hope and determination. For the first time since Victoria had walked through those elevator doors, he smiled. Actually, he said, I can. The war for their family's future was about to begin, and this time, Richard knew exactly which side he was fighting for. When everything you've built hangs in the balance, you discover what you're truly willing to sacrifice for love. The FBI agents swarmed Richard's office building like ants on a dropped ice cream cone, carrying boxes of evidence that represented 20 years of business deals Victoria had carefully documented during their marriage. Securities fraud, tax evasion, market manipulation, crimes that could send Atlanta's most powerful CEO to prison for decades. Monica sat in the hospital break room where she'd returned to work, watching the news coverage on her phone while David slept in the daycare center downstairs. Every channel showed the same story. Federal agents hauling away computers and files while reporters shouted questions about the investigation that was tearing apart Richard's empire. You okay, baby? Asked Janet, her nursing supervisor who'd become like a mother during the months Monica had been fighting for her family's survival. I don't know. Monica's voice carried the exhaustion of someone who'd thought the worst was behind them. This morning we were planning David's first birthday party. Now I'm watching his father's business collapse on live television. Her phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. Watching the news. Coming to get you. Another text from Richard. Don't believe what they're saying. I'll fix this. But how do you fix 20 years of questionable business practices when your ex-wife has documented every illegal decision you ever made? When the woman you once trusted with your life decides to use that trust as a weapon. Have you ever watched someone you love face consequences for choices they made before they knew better? When the person they've become has to pay for who they used to be. Monica's phone rang, Richard's number lighting up the screen like a lifeline thrown to someone drowning. Where are you? His voice sounded hollow as an empty grave. At work. David's safe. That's what matters right now. No, it's not what matters. Richard's words came fast, desperate, like someone running out of time to say everything important. What matters is that I dragged you into this mess. Victoria's doing this to hurt me, but you and David are the ones who will suffer. Through the break room windows, Monica could see news vans pulling into the hospital parking lot. Reporters who'd figured out where Richard Hale's baby mama worked, ready to turn her life into entertainment for people who'd never understand what it meant to love someone through scandal. Richard, listen to me. The feds want to make an example out of someone. Guess who that someone's going to be? His laugh sounded like something breaking that couldn't be fixed. Victoria gave them enough evidence to put me away for 30 years. But that's not the worst part. Monica's heart stopped. What's the worst part? They're going after custody of David, claiming I'm an unfit father because of the criminal charges. Victoria's already filed paperwork requesting emergency custody based on my moral character and criminal associations. The break room felt smaller suddenly, like the walls were closing in around everything she'd fought to protect. 6 months of building a family, of learning to trust, of believing that love could overcome any obstacle. All of it crashing down because someone who'd never loved David wanted to use him as a weapon. Do you know what it feels like when your child becomes collateral damage in someone else's war? When the courts decide that money and reputation matter more than the bonds you've built through midnight feedings and first smiles. There's more, Richard continued, his voice barely working. Victoria's claiming Marcus isn't a suitable guardian either. Says our unconventional arrangement proves David's in an unstable environment. Monica closed her eyes, feeling the weight of decisions that would determine her son's future. Fight Victoria in court with lawyers she couldn't afford, knowing the system favored wealth and conventional families. Or run. Take David and disappear before the courts could tear apart the only family her son had ever known. What are we going to do? She whispered. Richard's voice carried surprise that cut through the despair. After everything Victoria is threatening to expose, after all the ways this could destroy your reputation too, you're still saying we? Monica looked at David's picture on her phone. His first smile, captured during a moment when all 3 of his parents were making silly faces to get his attention. A moment when love mattered more than law, when family was defined by choice rather than biology. If loving you cost me everything else, Monica said, echoing words Richard had spoken to her months ago, then everything else wasn't worth keeping. The battle for their family had become a war, but they were going to fight it together. From the ashes of an empire built on ambition, they constructed something stronger, a family built on love. The courthouse steps felt like a stage where justice performed for crowds who treated other people's pain like entertainment. Monica climbed toward doors that would determine David's future, while reporters shouted questions designed to turn her love story into scandal for the evening news. Ms. Johnson, how does it feel knowing your boyfriend's going to prison? Is it true you're only after his money? What kind of mother shares custody with 3 different men? Marcus walked beside her, his hand on her back providing strength that cameras couldn't capture. Behind them, Richard's legal team moved like soldiers preparing for battle they weren't sure they could win. 6 months of FBI investigation had ended with surprising results. Victoria's evidence proved Richard's business practices were questionable, but not criminal. Her real crime was blackmail. Trying to extort $50 million using stolen documents and threats to destroy his family. Have you ever watched someone's hatred backfire so completely it destroyed them instead of their target? When revenge becomes a trap that catches the person setting it. All rise for the Honorable Judge Patricia Coleman. The family court looked like every other government building. Fluorescent lights that made everyone look tired, wood paneling that had witnessed 1,000 broken dreams, and a judge whose job was determining what best interests of the child meant when families didn't fit traditional definitions. Judge Coleman was a black woman in her 50s who'd probably seen every possible family arrangement during 20 years on the bench. She looked at the 3 adults sitting together on one side of the courtroom, then at Victoria's empty chair. The woman who'd started this war had fled to Europe when her blackmail scheme collapsed. This is highly unusual, Judge Coleman began, reading documents that outlined their co-parenting arrangement. 3 adults requesting joint custody of 1 child, with no biological relationship between 2 of the parties. Richard's lawyer stood up, briefcase full of character witnesses and financial statements proving his fitness as a father. Your Honor, my client has demonstrated consistent commitment to his son's welfare. Your Honor, interrupted Angela Washington, Monica's lawyer who'd fought this battle from the beginning. We're not asking you to choose between parents. We're asking you to recognize that this child already has 3 parents who've been successfully co-parenting for 8 months. Monica held David in her lap, watching him play with toy keys that jingled like tiny bells. At 14 months old, He called Richard Dada, Marcus Papa, and reached for all three adults when he needed comfort. Biology had made him Richard's son, but love had made him everyone's child. Do you think courts should define families based on tradition or function? When love creates bonds stronger than law, which should matter more? The child appears healthy and well-adjusted, Judge Coleman observed, watching David giggle at something Marcus had whispered. But I'm concerned about stability. What happens when romantic relationships change? When new partners enter the picture? Then we adapt, Monica answered simply. The same way divorced parents do, except we're choosing cooperation instead of competition. Judge Coleman spent 20 minutes reviewing medical records, school evaluations, and testimony from David's pediatrician. Finally, she looked up with the expression judges wore when they made decisions that would echo through generations. Joint custody granted. All three parties will share legal and physical custody, with primary residence rotating monthly. Her gavel hit would like a period ending a sentence that had taken 2 years to write. As they walked down courthouse steps into Atlanta's sunshine, David babbling happily in Monica's arms while Richard and Marcus planned his second birthday party. Three adults realized they'd just proven that family wasn't about fitting society's expectations. It was about showing up for each other, especially when showing up wasn't easy. 2 years after fighting for one child's life, they discovered another heartbeat joining their symphony of love. Monica's hand trembled as she stared at the pregnancy test, watching 2 pink lines appear like destiny written in medical science. The bathroom at Richard's penthouse, their penthouse now, since they'd all moved in together 6 months ago, felt smaller suddenly, packed with implications that would change everything again. 3 years. That's how long it had taken to build something that looked like chaos to outsiders, but felt like home to everyone living inside it. David, now 2.5, called the penthouse our house and expected all 3 adults to tuck him in every night. Richard had learned to make pancakes shaped like dinosaurs. Marcus taught David Spanish songs while Monica worked night shifts at the hospital. Manga. David's voice carried through the door, followed by little fists pounding like he was trying to break down walls. Papa says breakfast ready. Monica opened the door to find her son standing in pajamas covered with cartoon trucks, his mixed-race features telling the story of love that had crossed every line society tried to draw. Behind him stood Marcus, holding a spatula and wearing the kind of patient smile that came from someone who'd earned the right to be called Papa through midnight diaper changes and fever scares. "Everything okay?" Marcus asked, his eyes noticing details that came from 3 years of learning to read her moods. Monica held up the pregnancy test like evidence of a miracle she wasn't sure she was ready for. "We need to talk. All of us." 30 minutes later, 3 adults sat around the breakfast table while David constructed buildings from pancake pieces, completely unaware that his parents were about to navigate uncharted territory again. "Pregnant." Richard repeated the word like he was learning a foreign language. "Are you? How do you feel about that?" "Terrified. Excited. Confused." Monica's honesty had become the foundation their family was built on. "This wasn't planned, obviously. My birth control failed, and I have no idea which of you." "Does it matter?" Marcus interrupted gently, his question carrying the wisdom that came from loving a child who wasn't biologically his. "We figure out how to be a family once. We can figure out again. Have you ever faced a situation that should have complicated everything, but somehow made everything simpler? When love becomes the answer to questions you didn't know how to ask." Richard reached across the table to touch Monica's hand, his fingers intertwining with hers in a gesture that had become natural as breathing. "David's going to have a little brother or sister." "Brother?" David announced from his high chair, syrup covering his face like war paint. "I want brother." "We don't know if it's a brother yet, baby," Monica laughed, the sound mixing relief with joy in ways that made the penthouse feel even more like home. "Brother," David repeated with the certainty of someone who'd never learned that life was supposed to be complicated. Marcus stood up, moving to the window that overlooked Atlanta's skyline. 3 years ago, he'd been a man competing for a woman's love. Now he was a father helping to raise children who called him Papa and meant it. 2 kids, 3 parents, one unconventional family, he said, his reflection showing in glass that framed the city they'd all learned to call home. The neighbors are really going to talk now. Let them talk, Richard said, pulling Monica closer while David climbed into Marcus's lap. We've got more important things to worry about, like cribs to buy, names to choose, and proving once again that love doesn't follow rules. It writes its own. He once measured success in billions. Now he counted in heartbeats, laughter, and moments that money can't buy. The delivery room that had once held fear now hosted pure joy as Richard cut his daughter's umbilical cord, present for every moment he'd missed the first time. Sophia Marie Hale Johnson Thompson entered the world screaming like she had opinions about everything, which made perfect sense considering she had 3 parents who taught her older brother that having strong feelings was perfectly acceptable. Monica lay exhausted but glowing, watching her daughter's tiny fingers curl around nothing while David pressed his face against the observation window, Marcus holding him up so he could see his sister for the first time. She's perfect, Richard whispered, his voice carrying wonder that 20 years of business success had never taught him to feel. She's ours, Monica corrected, because after 4 years of building an unconventional family, she'd learned that perfection was less important than belonging. The genetic testing would come later, science determining which man had contributed DNA to create this small person who already owned 3 hearts completely. But it didn't matter anymore. Biology had taught them that love wasn't about chromosomes. It was about showing up, staying present, and choosing each other every single day. Have you ever realized that everything you thought mattered actually didn't? When success gets redefined by people who love you rather than people who profit from you. Dr. Green, the same doctor who delivered David and watched this family form through crisis, smiled as he completed his examination. Healthy baby girl. 8 pounds, 2 ounces. Strong lungs, obviously. Through the recovery room windows, Atlanta spread out like a kingdom Richard had once thought he needed to conquer. The city where he'd built an empire, lost everything that mattered, and discovered that rebuilding was more important than building. His phone buzzed with messages from business associates, reporters wanting statements about his unusual family arrangement, and board members who still couldn't understand why he'd restructured his entire company around spending time with children who might not even be biologically his. But Richard was busy counting different numbers now. First steps. First words. Bedtime stories read 3 times because David insisted all his parents take turns. Hospital visits where 3 adults held their breath until tiny hearts started beating normally again. What are you thinking about? Monica asked, recognizing the expression that meant Richard was processing emotions he still didn't have names for. I was thinking about legacy. Richard adjusted Sophia in his arms, watching her sleep with the complete trust that came from being born into love instead of obligation. My father left me money and taught me to be afraid of needing people. I want to leave them something better. Marcus entered the room, carrying David, who immediately demanded to hold his sister with the authority of someone who'd been waiting 9 months to meet her. Careful, Mijo, Marcus said, helping David support Sophia's head. She's still learning how to be in the world. Like us, David announced with the wisdom of almost 4-year-olds who'd grown up watching adults figure out how to love unconventionally. Monica laughed, the sound filling the hospital room with joy that had taken years of healing to build. Exactly like us, baby. We're all still learning. As visiting hours ended and their chosen family settled into the rhythm of life with 2 children, Richard realized something that would have shocked the man he'd been 5 years ago. The most successful thing he'd ever done wasn't building a billion-dollar empire. It was learning to share love without keeping score, to trust without controlling outcomes, and to measure wealth by moments instead of money. Some legacies lived in bank accounts. The best ones lived in hearts that knew they were chosen, wanted, and loved exactly as they were. If this story of second chances and unconventional love touched your heart, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories that prove love really can conquer all. Comment below. What's the most someone has changed for love? Remember, true love doesn't rescue you from your life. It gives you the courage to live it fully.